morning, friends. Today we are going to talk about the structure of a story. We have the story that we started with Esperanza Rising, and we did pages 1 through 3 where we read them. We just read the pages 1 through 3, and we'll read them again today. But we want to talk about the structure of a story, and when we're talking about the structure of a story, it often looks like this or like a mountain, and it comes across like this. Okay, so in your notebooks, I want you to draw that mountain. And we're going to talk about the pieces that go with that mountain. So on the bottom here, you end up with the exposition. The exposition is usually the beginning of the story. So we have the beginning of this story, and it gives us the characters. It kind of introduces them. Okay, so we do the introduction, the setting, and any background information. So it's the beginning of the story, and it tells us exactly what's going to happen in this story. So we have the exposition. After the exposition, we have what's called the rising action. And the rising action is obviously on the slope going up. So we have the rising action. After we get introduced to all the people or the main people in the story, we start to learn the main events of the story. It gives us our problem. So we start to see what the problem is in the story, and it pushes the plot along. So for example, if we were to talk to you about a superhero movie. So in the beginning of the superhero movie, we learn about the superhero. We learn where he lives. It tells us who he's with. It tells us all the friends that he knows and his background info. So it gives us kind of like what kind of superhero he is. And then in the rising action, we start to get into the problem. Okay, we start to find out that there's a problem with the villain, and the villain is doing this to the people of the city. It starts to push the plot along. So we've got this, the villain is doing all of these things, and the superhero is trying to keep up with him and trying to stay ahead of the game. And then all of a sudden, it all kind of comes to a head at the climax. The climax is the most exciting part of any book or movie. It's what we wait for. The superhero and the villain finally come together, and there's a huge war in the middle of the city, and all the stuff gets blown up, and the big fight happens, and it's the exciting part where the problem and the action come together. Exciting part. Where problem and action come together. Okay, so that's where everything kind of comes to a head, okay? It's what you're waiting for. It's what the story's been building up in this rising action to get to. And you're really excited because you want to see what's going to happen, all right? Once you find out, once all this happens in the climax, then we have sort of a falling action. It's usually a short falling action, which is why this one's not quite as long. But we have the falling action of a story. So the exciting part where the problem and the action come together, that's in the climax. And then the falling action kind of gives us the problems start to get wrapped up. So we see where the villain ends up in jail, or he ends up not surviving. So they start to wrap up what happened. So this war part, they start to wrap it up. So it's into a nice tidy little bow. And then at the very end of it, we have what's called the resolution. Resolution. The problem is solved. That's what a resolution actually means. The problem is solved, but it's the end of the story. It's the end of the story that we have, and all the loose ends get tied up in a nice, neat little bow. Okay, so after all this happened and the villain gets put into jail, they show the main actor, the main character at the very end, and he's back with his friends, and there's no more problems, and all is right with the world. So that is our end of the story. All the loose ends kind of get tied up neat and tidy in a little bow, as long as there are no sequels. The sequels mean that we're still in the rising action part, that we haven't hit the climax. So if there's like 3 movies that go with one particular genre and we're following them, we're still in the rising action. The climax doesn't happen until probably about the final movie. Okay, so that's in a sequel. But in this case, if we just have one movie, one book, one story, then the climax happens, and then it's a short falling action and a resolution. So we see how the problem gets solved, and then they tidy it up in a neat little bow, and he moves on with the rest of his life. Now, as you know, we were reading in Esperanza Rising, and we did we did pages 1 through 3. So I'm going to pull up this. I'm going to erase as well. So I'm going to pull up where we have chapters 1 through 3. And we talked about the gist of the story, what that story is mostly about. So we're looking at, once it gets pulled up, we're looking at pages 1 through 3 in our interactive notebook. And as you can see, I have our structure of the story. So we have exposition, we have rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. We want to see where pages 1 through 3 fall in to the structure of the story. So I'm going to read those pages, and we are going to see where it falls in and why. So I know you've heard this one before, but we're going to read it again. Aguascalientes, Mexico, 1924. Our land is alive, Esperanza, said Papa, taking her small hand as they walked through the gentle slopes of the vineyard. Leafy green vines draped the arbors, and the grapes were ready to drop. Esperanza was 6 years old and loved to walk with her Papa through the winding rows, gazing up at him and watching his eyes dance with a love for the land. This whole valley breathes and lives, he said, sweeping his arm toward the distant mountains that guarded them. It gives us the grapes, and then they welcome us. He gently touched a wild tendril that reached into the row as if it had been waiting to shake his hand. He picked up a handful of earth and studied it. Did you know that when you lie down on the land, you can feel it breathe, that you can feel its heart beating? Poppy, I want to feel it, she said. Come. They walked to the end of the row, where the incline of the land formed a grassy swell. Papa lay down on his stomach and looked up at her, patting the ground next to him. Esperanza smoothed her dress and knelt down. Then, like a caterpillar, she slowly inched flat next to him, their faces looking at each other. The warm sun pressed on one of Esperanza's cheeks, and the warm earth on the other. She giggled. Shh, he said. You can only feel the earth's heartbeat when you are still and quiet. She swallowed her laughter and after a moment said, I can't hear it, Papi. Aguantate tantito y la fruta cierra en tu mano, he said. Wait a little while and the fruit will fall into your hand. You must be patient, Esperanza. She waited and lay silent, watching Papa's eyes, and then she felt it. Softly at first, a gentle thumping, then stronger, a resounding thud, thud, thud against her body. She could hear it too, the beat rushing in her ears. Shoom, shoom, shoom. She stared at Papa, not wanting to say a word, not wanting to lose the sound, not wanting to forget the feel of the heart of the valley. She pressed closer to the ground until her body was breathing with the earth's and with Papa's, the 3 hearts beating together. She smiled at Papa, not needing to talk. Her eyes saying everything, and his smile answered hers, telling her he knew she had felt it. So we're looking at this chapter, and if you looked at that, we have the beginning of the story describing how things are before the action begins. It sets up the characters. So we've got the character and the setting. So pages 1 through 3 are going to be the exposition. We are setting up what's about to happen. So we have the exposition in here, and it's because we introduce main characters, and set up the story. So it gives us that background info. So the structure of the story actually fits in where we are looking at the exposition. Now, if we think about it too, we can also come up with the gist of what that story is about. And the gist can be something quick and easy. So we talk about who's in that story right there. We have Esperanza and her father. Well, where are they? Esperanza and her father, and I'm going to write the word gist over here because I'm going to give you just the gist. Esperanza and her father, they are in a field. So I give you the characters. I give you the setting. So Esperanza and her father, and I'm going to write right over it. Esperanza and her father, those are our characters. Right? They're in a field. There's our setting. And what are they doing in that field? So Esperanza and her father are in a field, and they want to feel the heartbeat of the earth. The heartbeat of the earth. Now that's one of those phrases that we kind of have to understand. They want to feel the heartbeat of the earth. If you think about the earth, and we've been talking about it a little bit in science, but if you think about the earth, things are living on it. We have the land, we have the grass, we have the vines. They're in a vineyard, right? We know that because of the grapes. And he says that you need to feel the heartbeat of the earth. You need to feel it breathe. And if you lay down on your belly, you can feel that. So if you lay down in the grass, you can feel the breeze, you can feel the wind, you can feel the movement of the grass, you can feel these things because the earth is living and moving, and he thinks it's breathing. So we have to feel the heartbeat of the earth in order to understand it. So not only do we now know that the structure of the story is the exposition, because it introduces the main characters and sets up the story. That's the structure for pages 1 through 3. I'm going to make that a little bit darker so you can see pages 1 through 3. We have the structure, and we also have the gist. What's going on in the story? Esperanza and her father in a field, and they want to feel the heartbeat of the earth. Okay? Tomorrow we will get into pages 4 through 22. So if you're using your notebook instead of my notebook, you need to set it up like this. So I have a little box, and we're going to keep going with all the pages. So we've got this little box like this, and you set it up just like this. This is also called Las Uvas, and that's what we will be working on tomorrow, chapter 1, Las Uvas, and we're going to figure out where it falls in the structure of the story. So on your key, you can also put structure of a story. Okay? Because that's what we are really looking at. The exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Those are things that you need to know when it comes to the end of the year. So you'll know how every story, every movie, they're all set up in the same way using that particular structure.